Literary history often treats John Keats's maturation as a process of elimination. The standard biography suggests he only found his true voice when he learned to excise the highly decorated, sentimental influences of his youth. We are told to look at the winter of 1818 to 1819 as the dividing line. This is when Keats actively decided to strip away the florid aesthetics he had absorbed as a student. He documented this shift in a massive journal letter to his brother and sister-in-law. Targeting the popular Irish poet Mary Tighe, he wrote, "Mrs. Tighe and Beattie once delighted me. Now I see through them and can find nothing in them, or weakness." This letter served as a deliberate act of professional self-authorization. By putting this dismissal in writing, Keats was publicly distancing himself from a style of literature largely associated with female writers and readers, a style he felt lacked serious ambition. He signaled a pivot toward older, validated male classical traditions. Instead of modern Spenserian romances, he claimed his new benchmark for myth was the 16th century English translation of Lucius Apuleius. But the timeline presents a strict contradiction. Just months after writing off Tighe as weak and empty, Keats entered the spring of 1819 and composed the great odes that cemented his legacy. His conscious rejection of Tighe was largely a biographical construct. Beneath the confident rhetoric of his letters, the poetry itself reveals a massive, unacknowledged reliance on the very writer he claimed to have outgrown. When examining literature, we sometimes encounter a lexical palimpsest. This occurs when the foundational vocabulary of an older text bleeds through the architecture of a newly constructed poem. When you isolate the vocabulary Keats deployed in his 1819 masterworks, you find a heavy saturation of highly unusual, archaic Spenserian terms that do not belong to his stated classical influences. Empirical linguistic tracking maps the specific vocabulary directly back to one primary source, Mary Tighe's epic poem, Psyche. The lexical residue of Tighe's Psyche is baked into the foundation of Ode to Psyche, Ode to a Nightingale, and the Eve of St. Agnes. If he truly saw through her work and found nothing in it but weakness, we have to ask why his unquestionable masterpieces rely so heavily on her exact phrasing. A poet's conscious diagnosis of their own influences is often unreliable. The true architectural foundations of their work tend to bypass the intellect and survive deep within the unconscious memory. During his adolescent apprenticeship, Keats's reliance on Tighe was entirely conscious and celebrated. His earliest surviving poem, the 1814 Imitation of Spenser, shows him directly emulating her vocabulary to build his own metrical exercises. We know this because he borrowed the identical phrase, "laughs the cerulean sky," straight from Tighe's 1805 text. In 1928, scholar Earl Vonard Weller tracked this influence, mapping over 400 parallel passages between their works. Philologist Helen Derbyshire met this claim with skepticism, arguing Weller's methodology was uncritical. She pointed out 90% of these parallels were common clichés, like Golden Sands or Lovely Bride. These were filtered out, as Keats could have absorbed them elsewhere. But Derbyshire conceded a crucial point. After destroying the bulk of Weller's count, she admitted that the surviving, highly unusual word clusters could not be coincidence. They constituted a genuine, unconscious residue. Because these specific phrases survive strict academic filtering, they provide hard evidence that Tighe's verse had become a permanent fixture in Keats's auditory memory. To see this retention, look at the most famous linguistic anomaly in Keats's late work, the word darkling in Ode to a Nightingale. Historically, writers like Shakespeare and Milton used darkling strictly as an adverb, meaning to do something in the dark. Mary Tighe broke that rule in Psyche. She altered the word into an adjective to describe a physical expanse, writing of forests darkling wide. Keats ignored his classical idols and adopted Tighe's exact adjectival usage for his own ode. This pattern repeats with other survivals, namely the rare epithet poppied and the archaism slumbery. Tighe used these for sleep states and moments of deep emotional transition for her heroine. Keats lifted this exact terminology to map the hypnotic, dream-bound atmospheres in the Eve of St. Agnes and Ode on Melancholy. The extreme specificity of this vocabulary, deployed months after he wrote her off, reveals something fascinating. Keats was likely entirely unaware that he was channeling the very woman he claimed to despise. The culmination of this inheritance is his 1819 masterpiece, Ode to Psyche. Tighe's original poem was a sprawling epic driven by geographical exploration and physical trials. Keats's innovation was an act of severe compression. He collapsed that massive narrative into a stationary, hyper-focused lyrical space. Keats performed an act of deep-level translation, stripping Tighe's romance down to its essential parts to fuel his own stationary lyrics. We can see these mechanics at work in a specific architectural word that bridges both poems, the fane or temple. Tighe wrote of a literal fane, an external stone structure situated squarely in the physical world of her allegory. Keats discarded the physical world entirely. He realized the most profound location for Tighe's temple was not on a map, but inside the human mind. He executed this inward turn in the final stanza of Ode to Psyche, declaring his intent to build the fane in some untrodden region of my mind. He traded the finite, geographical external space of his predecessor for the infinite internal space of his own consciousness. By internalizing the myth, Keats helped establish the precedent for the psychological interiority that now characterizes the Romantic era. We started with the biographical myth that an artist must make a clean break from their early influences to find greatness, but literary self-fashioning is far more complex. True independence is almost always built upon the invisible, internalized bedrock of those who came before us. Keats's maturity was not an escape from Mary Tighe, but a sophisticated evolution of her influence, turning her Spenserian music into something entirely new. His greatest act of originality lay in gathering the discarded stones of Tighe's Spenserian temple to build the architecture of the modern psychological ode.